Off the coast of northern Chile, fishermen used to haul in nets heavy with anchovy and hake. Then, almost overnight, the numbers changed. In some bays, catches dropped by more than half. At first, no one blamed the sea lions. They had always been there, resting on the rocks, diving for scraps near the boats. But something shifted. Their colonies grew larger. Their numbers multiplied along stretches of coastline where fishing boats once worked freely. Local fishermen began to notice bald patches of shoreline, once used for nets and boat launches, now crowded with barking animals. Government reports showed a strange pattern. In areas where sea lion populations expanded fastest, fish stocks seemed to fall the hardest. But in other places, the opposite happened. Fish were coming back, not disappearing, coming back in greater numbers than before. Marine biologists in Valparaiso started asking a question that nobody expected to matter this much. Had giving the coastline back to sea lions saved the fishing industry or destroyed it? The answer would take years to uncover, and it would force scientists to rethink everything they believed about predators, fishermen, and the ocean they all depended on. The story begins in the early 2000s along Chile's Norte Grande coast. Ports like Iquique and Antofagasta had built their economies on fish. Anchovy, sardine, hake. The ocean here was one of the richest in the world. Then came a new law. Chile expanded protections for South American sea lions, banning hunting and restricting boat access near breeding colonies. At first, fishermen barely noticed. The animals had always shared these waters. But within a decade, colonies that once held a few hundred sea lions grew into thousands. Rocky outcrops disappeared under moving bodies. The barking never stopped, day or night. Fisherman Ricardo Soto remembers the first year his nets came up torn. They weren't just eating fish anymore, he said. They were following the boats. Reports spread along the coast. Sea lions stealing catch straight from nets. Sea lions blocking harbor entrances. Some fishermen say the animals learned to recognize the sound of specific engines. Wildlife officials dismissed it as exaggeration. Then the catch data came in. In some fishing zones, hake landings had dropped by nearly 40% in just 6 years. Panic spread through coastal unions. Meetings were held in Iquique, demanding the government reverse the protections. But marine biologists noticed something strange in the numbers. The decline wasn't uniform. Some zones, close to the largest sea lion colonies, were thriving. Fish were multiplying, not vanishing. Nobody could explain why the same predator seemed to be destroying fisheries in one bay and rebuilding them in another. The Chilean Fisheries Agency assigned a research team to investigate. What they found would change how scientists understood the entire coastline. The research team, led by marine biologist Andres Fuentes, started with satellite tags. 12 sea lions were fitted with trackers along the Antofagasta coast. The goal was simple: follow the animals, follow the fish. Within weeks, the data showed something unexpected. The sea lions weren't hunting randomly. They were targeting specific zones, day after day, at almost the same hours. Fuentes assumed they were following the fishing boats, feeding on the easiest prey. But the tracking maps told a different story. Many of the sea lions were feeding far from any boats at all. Some traveled to areas fishermen had abandoned years earlier, zones considered fished out and empty. That detail didn't make sense. If the fish were gone, why were the sea lions still hunting there and thriving? Fuentes ordered underwater surveys in those exact locations. What the divers found stopped the team cold. The empty zones weren't empty at all. Fish populations were dense, tightly packed, larger than anything recorded in nearby fished areas. One diver described swimming through anchovies so thick he lost sight of his own hands. Fuentes had a theory forming, but it contradicted everything the fishing unions believed. If true, it meant the sea lions weren't destroying the fish stocks. They might be protecting them. But if that was true, why were other bays, just kilometers away, collapsing under the same predator? The team needed proof, and that proof would come from an area nobody expected to matter. A stretch of coastline called Bahia Megallones, where the two opposite outcomes existed side by side. Bahia Megallones sits split down the middle by an invisible line. On one side, a protected sea lion colony. On the other, an open fishing zone worked hard for decades. Fuentes focused his team there, hoping the bay itself would reveal the pattern. The results were immediate. Fish density near the protected side was nearly triple that of the open fishing side. But something else caught the team's attention. The fish weren't just more abundant. They were bigger, older, and reproducing at higher rates. One technician, Pablo Rivas, ran the numbers twice, certain he'd made an error. He hadn't. Then came a discovery that unsettled even the most experienced biologists on the team. Sea lions weren't only eating fish. They were eating something else, something smaller, something few people had considered. Predatory fish. Species that fed heavily on juvenile anchovy and hake, keeping populations suppressed for years. Rivas began pulling stomach samples from stranded and deceased sea lions along the coast. The pattern repeated itself over and over. A significant portion of their diet wasn't the commercial fish at all. It was competitors, mid-sized predators that fishermen never targeted and never worried about. For years, those predators had multiplied unchecked, quietly draining the fishery from below. Nobody had noticed. Nobody had measured it. The sea lions, in some areas, had been controlling that hidden threat all along. But if that was true here, in Bahia Megallones, why weren't the same benefits showing up everywhere else along the coast? Why were some colonies still linked to shrinking fish stocks, while others rebuilt entire ecosystems? The answer was about to force Fuentes to question something far more basic than sea lion behavior. It would mean rethinking what overfishing actually meant. Fuentes pulled every fishing record for the region, going back 20 years. He wasn't looking at the sea lions anymore. He was looking at the boats. The pattern, once he saw it, felt obvious in hindsight. The bays where fish stocks collapsed weren't just home to sea lion colonies. They were also the bays still being actively fished hard with heavy equipment close to shore. The bays where fish stocks recovered had one thing in common. Fishing pressure there had already dropped. years earlier for reasons that had nothing to do with sea lions at all. Some ports had shifted to deeper offshore fleets. Others had simply been abandoned after earlier fish crashes in the 1990s. The sea lions hadn't caused the difference. They had simply revealed it. In bays still under heavy fishing, every fish the sea lions took was a fish the boats needed too. Tension was inevitable. In bays already recovering, the sea lions were feeding on the surplus and on the predators that competing fish species couldn't control alone. Rivas called it an uncomfortable coincidence dressed up as a villain. Fishermen hadn't been fighting sea lions. They'd been fighting the last visible symbol of a decline they had caused themselves. Fuentes knew this conclusion would not be welcome in Iquique. Fishing unions had spent years demanding culls, blaming the animals publicly, pushing lawmakers for reduced protections. Now, the data suggested the opposite policy. Protect the sea lions further, and the fish would return faster. Reduce their numbers, and the recovering bays could collapse just like the others. Fuentes prepared his report, aware it would ignite one of the most contentious environmental debates in Chile's fishing history. What happened next would test whether science could survive contact with an entire industry's livelihood. The report reached Valparaiso in early 2015. Within days, it leaked to local fishing unions. The reaction was immediate and furious. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Some fishermen accused the researchers of choosing animals over families. Ricardo Soto, whose torn nets had started the story years earlier, sat through one of those meetings in silence. He had lost income. He had lost trust in the process. But when Fuentes laid out the bay-by-bay comparisons, showing the same coastline producing opposite outcomes, something shifted in the room. The evidence didn't ask fishermen to accept blame. It asked them to change strategy. Chile's fisheries agency moved cautiously. Instead of expanding protections everywhere, they introduced rotating closures, allowing certain bays to rest while others stayed open. Sea lion colonies were left undisturbed in recovery zones. Boats were redirected toward deeper waters, away from the shallow nurseries where juvenile fish depended on cover. The results took nearly 4 years to fully appear. Hake stocks near Bahia Megallones climbed past pre-decline levels for the first time in over a decade. Anchovy landings, once feared lost permanently, rebounded across 3 neighboring ports. Soto returned to the same waters where his nets first came up torn. This time, they came up full. He still sees the sea lions every morning, resting on the rocks, watching the boats. He no longer sees them as the enemy. The Chilean coast didn't recover because the sea lions were removed. It recovered because people finally understood what the animals had been doing all along. If this story showed you how much we still don't understand about the ocean beneath our own coastlines, subscribe and stay for the next investigation.